I lost mine.
You lost your hat?
I lost my beanie.
I did too. Where did it go?
So Connor, what are we doing?
How do we start it?
How are we starting this?
So I think what it is we're gonna have Quee's face from that one video that we were gonna do that we never did.
No, don't pull it out yet.
I thought we were gonna put it in the sink.
No, we're gonna, when we get serious, it's gonna be like.
So we'll start, and how we start is we're gonna both walk in.
Hi, I'm Aaron the Radkey Connection.
And I'm Connor, PhD Neil.
And this is the Untitled Weekly Show.
That's when the music kicks in. Do it. Say it again.
No, we're starting from scratch.
Go.
I'm Aaron the Radkey Connection.
And I'm Connor, PhD Neil.
And this is the Untitled Weekly Show. Well, welcome to the first episode of the Untitled Weekly Show, where we talk about whatever we want and you like it.
Today,
We
we are going to be talking about. Are we gonna do the chalk?
we could.
Today we're going to talk about different ways of keeping different stories going in a way that you can come back to them or add to them without losing them. So like if you start, you're working on one story and you're like, I like this story. This is a good story, and you got a lot of good ideas for it, and then all of a sudden you're just like, maybe I don't want to work on that one. I got a new story I like. So what we got going on is Perpetual Stew, which is my way,
Versus the Crockpot method,
which
is my way.
which is his way.
Connor, how about you explain what Perpetual Stew is?
Perpetual Stew, I think it was in Europe or something. They would make a stew at like an inn, and they would just keep adding to it every night, and the stew would just go, and they'd never stop making the stew. It was just always on the fire. There was always things being added to the stew. All right, you want to explain the crock pot?
A crock pot is a crock pot. It's a pot, and you throw meats or whatever you want, and it just slowly cooks it, and then you got yourself a meal. So why are we talking about perpetual stews and crock pots?
Yeah, why are we talking about those? I forgot already.
So, Connor and I are storytellers, first and foremost.
Or second sometimes.
Sometimes second. And we have two ways that we approach creating and categorizing stories within the noggin. Perpetual Stew, Connor's way, is basically every single story he has written is all within the same interconnected universe.
Years ago, I used to have a very hard time remembering. Like, I'd come up with a story and then I'd forget it. And so what I started doing was connecting all the stories so that now when I'm like, all right, what happens in that story? I can be like, well, what happened in the story before and what happened in the story after? And it connects things. It also helps link. So like if I need to figure out what would happen in one story, I'm like, well, where does the story need to end? Because I already have another story, and that's something that tells me what the end of this story needs to be.
I've had a similar problem with as Connor's. And basically, I'd come up with stories, and then I'd kind of forget about them, and then I'd come back to them. But instead of what Connor did, I basically started to embrace that. Each story sits in its own crock pot. And every once in a while, like what you do with crock pots, you go to it, you open it up, you add some seasoning, you stir it up a little, you get excited, you start working on it, and then you leave it alone. And then I move on to the next story, or crock pot. So, right, he has a massive pot of Perpetual Stew. I have around 100 crock pots that I'm working on. So those are the two methods.
There's most likely many other methods out there.
But we are two fools.
We are two fools who have come up with our methods. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say about these things.
Well, this is a versus, so what are the pros and cons?
This is a versus. Pros and cons.
Pros and cons.
All right, I'm gonna go over some pros. I've already gone over quite a few pros of Perpetual Stew. Pros being, it helps you remember different things. It helps you kind of write itself. when you have stories around the story you're working on. But some of the biggest cons are that, let's say you have a really good idea for a character to have a moment where the character would grow in a certain way by using a certain power or like something they learned. Well, if that doesn't align with all the other stories, with this cohesive group of rules that you've put together, you have two choices. You can either do what Marvel does and just be like, whatever, people won't think about it too hard.
Oh, they will most definitely.
People will think about it too hard. Or you can do what I'm trying to do, which is very difficult, and I don't always do the best job, but rewrite the story so that it doesn't break the rules I've created. And I usually end up with something just about as good. It's just, it's a little more work.
So the Crockpot method. One of the pros of the Crockpot method is you can establish rules for one world or one story, and you can write another story, and you don't have to abide by the old rules. You create new rules. It doesn't have to appease the rest of the previous or future stories you're going to make. So you can have character moments and cool things in one story, and if it were in the universe of one world, it would completely break the rules, and it would be total nonsense, and it would feel really cheap. Whereas in the world that it currently sits in is totally plausible and something that could happen. The cons, you end up with a lot of crockpots. Like, you're sitting there and you're just like going through some notes and you're like, oh wow, that story's amazing. How long has it been since I looked at that crockpot? 10 years maybe. If you don't take care of it, it will eventually turn into Perpetual stew.
Yes.
If Perpetual stew is a choice, then by God, do it. If it's not a choice, may God have mercy on your soul.
On your soul. For me, it was at first. Now, it is no longer a choice. Every single story I come up with, I'm like, this is not going to be related to all my other stories. And then, like, a couple pages in, I'm like, wow, this would fit so well right there.
2019, Prairie Grass Film Challenge. We wrote the two of us wrote a story for a short film that we'll throw down in the comments, and it was supposed to be a dumb, fun superhero short. Halfway through writing it, it just became, Connor was like, you know what? This would work really well in X series. And they were just like, shoot, you write.
It worked so well.
And it works so well. But it just happens. Like, you have to be prepared for that.
You have to be prepared that you might be walking out with a crockpot, trip, and fall into the stew. And then when you're in the stew, there's nothing you can do.
I mean, nothing to do but
We're gonna
simmer.
make a t-shirt that says that. When you're in the stew, there's nothing you can do.
But simmer.
And then, yeah, the back is just but simmer. So I think that about concludes this episode. I can't think of any other things to say related to this. I can think of a lot of other things to say. None of them would fit into this discussion.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Untitled Weekly Show. Tune in next week where we wax a chicken.
We're gonna wax a chicken?
You go down. Oh yeah, it's this. They can't see the legs, but
So you get up on the table.
I ain't jumping up there.
All we can see is
Here, you do the bottom. So this is if you could see the top and bottom. Imagine his top on my bottom. Let me start that sentence over because it wasn't getting anywhere.